Music industry whistleblower, has written, a publisher of 4 books, is it?
5.
5 books, which he has here as well if anyone wants to buy any. And also you've got an amazing YouTube channel which a lot of people have absolutely loved.
We all know
Mark Devlin TV.
Mark Devlin TV. So guys, let's give it up. We are so lucky to have him. And thank you, Mia and Dustin, for organising.
Oh, we should take a picture.
Thanks, Freya. Hey, everyone. Well, what a trip. What an amazing place.
There it is.
You know, 15 to 20 years ago, round about this time on a Friday evening, I'd have been getting ready to go out to some club, maybe in the UK, maybe overseas. I was fortunate enough to be able to DJ all over the place back in the day. But then I would have been missing out on this type of experience. And this is what my life now is.
Yay.
You find that when you step out of your comfort zone and take a walk on the wild side, you start to attract towards you all kinds of amazing experiences, people, situations, such as this.
Yeah, you do.
And it's all about vibrational frequencies, right? Golden frequencies. It's all about synchronicities and serendipity and all these amazing things that happen to you when you embark on a certain path. And so I started on this path around about 2007, 2008, when I started to have some really big questions about what was going on in this world and what the nature of life was in the first place. And this all came to a head for me in 2010, and it was the books of David Icke that got me on this path. That's what it was. That's what it was. It was his book, Human Race, Get Off Your Knees, which I read in 2010, changed my world, changed my whole perception on things, and I found it answered so many of the big questions that I'd had in life up to that point, because I'd been questioning why life seemed so unjust, why there were wars all the time, why there was poverty, why there was famine, all of this, why there was corruption in high places. And then I came to realize that it's designed to be that way. It's not any kind of random accident that these things happen. And so I came to a comprehension of the control system that we have presiding over all aspects of organised society. And my specialist area of interest at that point was trying to comprehend how that played out into the corporate music industry, the controlled music industry of which I'd been a part up to that point. So that became my specialist area of research, and I threw myself into it, went down about 500 different rabbit holes at the same time. I'm sure many of us are familiar with that experience. And that resulted in my first book, Musical Truth, Volume 1, which I brought out in 2016. That was the result of 5 years worth of research. And so I'm now preparing to unleash the 3rd volume of that, because the story never stops, it turns out. But I've come to realise and discover and accept a whole load of things throughout the last 11 years. And I'm going to get on to aspects of COVID towards the end of this. I won't make it too long. But I really wanted to understand the true nature of the music industry and who controlled it. And when I first started looking at these things, I made the mistake of thinking this was a relatively recent thing. And I started looking at music videos and occult symbology and aspects of mind control and social engineering agendas that have been pushed over recent years, you know, going back the previous 10 or 15 years. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that it goes much further back. And I found myself going into the 1990s, going back to the 1980s, the 70s, the 60s. And before I knew it, I was all the way back to the very start of these industries. And I came to realize that the entire reason for setting up the corporate controlled music industry and all other aspects of entertainment as well was because of the incredible opportunities that they offered for mind control, pushing fear-based propaganda, and promoting social engineering agendas. That is the entire reason for the entertainment industry being the way it is. And so my research led me all the way back to the 1950s. And I quickly came to comprehend that many of the early record labels that put out some of these early artists had their roots in military research and aspects of military intelligence. And this is something that's been consistent through my research, going through the different decades. Constantly, you find the presence of military intelligence operations and different aspects of the military. We can see it in some of the very early record labels. RCA, for example, in America, the Radio Corporation of America, that came out of the Navy. And it was initially steeped in sonar and radar research and aspects of radio technology with military applications. Then it became a record label, and it started putting out some of the prominent recording artists of the day. This was also the case here in the UK with the major record labels that you had on this side of the pond, specifically EMI being a very good example. Electrical Mechanical Industries, headed up by Sir Joseph Lockwood, a British aristocrat with connections going all the way into elite circles. And so you realise all these major recording artists that they first put out, such as Elvis Presley over in the United States, the Beatles and Cliff Richard in the UK, they all have connections going into military intelligence operations. With the Beatles and with their supposed rivals, the Rolling Stones, they both have connections going into the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations here in London, which is all about social engineering agendas. It's all about shaping and moulding public perceptions and dictating the mindset of the general public. And that's what these music artists have been used for all these decades. It turns out that many of the prominent recording artists from back in the day were made up of lifetime actors, which is a term that was coined by the author and the researcher Joseph Atwill. And the idea of a lifetime actor is it's somebody that's put out there in the public eye and they're thought of as one thing or another. So it might be a musician, it might be a Hollywood actor, a television presenter, a prominent politician, a television presenter, somebody that is out there in the public eye and everyone knows who they are. But the truth of the matter, when you start doing some digging into their family backgrounds and their affiliations, is that they come from important bloodline families that have been given influential positions in society throughout the generations. And this is what you find. New generations of the same families get put into these positions. And they're there to shape and mould public perceptions and lead the general public mindset off down the garden path in certain desired areas. So there are many examples of this that I've cited in my books. I mean, there was even a mainstream newspaper article that came out many years ago looking at the family bloodline of George Bush. And it was ridiculous. This was in the Daily Mail. And they showed how if you go back enough generations and you look in all the different directions in which it veers off, the Bush family bloodline has connections into, it goes back to Abraham Lincoln, it goes into Hollywood actors like Brad Pitt, Tom Hanks, Angelina Jolie. So Brad and Angelina were thought of as this organic romantic couple that just happened to get together, but it turns out they're bloody related. You know, they're cousins. All these people are cousins several times removed. This same bloodline goes into Madonna. Now you know why Madonna became famous. It wasn't because of her talent.
Oh, yeah.
And you find out that Madonna is a cousin of Celine Dion on her mother's side, coming out of French-Canadian ancestry. And she's also a cousin of Lady Gaga. So now you know where Lady Gaga came from. So none of these people get into these prominent positions by virtue of their skill or their talent or crossing their fingers for good luck. It's because of their bloodline families and who their ancestors were. We get the same thing with Bono. Ever wondered why Bono became famous?
I used to like him.
Yeah, and he spends more time now hobnobbing with the likes of Bill Gates and Bill Clinton and the Pope and all these people. Well, it's because of where he comes from. He comes from a very prominent English aristocratic bloodline which emigrated to Ireland several generations in the past, and they put out different generations of this same family into influential positions. So one of his cousins was Barbara Hewson, who died in January this year, but she was a prominent Irish barrister. And one of her claims to fame was that she campaigned for the age of consent for adults to be able to have sexual relations with children to be lowered to the age of 13. Nice lady.
Oh my God.
She was also pro-abortion, so I'm sure we were all very saddened to hear of her passing away in January of this year. But she turns out to be a cousin of Bono. And so this is the case in so many areas that you look. It's lifetime actors, it's bloodline families, and that's where these people come from. You have connections going into military intelligence for days. Many of you might be familiar with the great work of the late author and researcher out of America, Dave McGowan. He put out a book called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. That was his landmark work in 2014. Sadly, by the following year, Dave had died of an extremely aggressive and fast-acting form of cancer. He died on the 22nd of November, the anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, an interesting date for a conspiracy researcher to pass away on. I'm sure you would agree. But he left behind an incredible legacy of work, and he showed how so many of the musicians that cropped up in the Laurel Canyon district of Los Angeles in the mid to late 1960s. These were the leaders of the musical revolution connected to the counterculture of those times. So this really changed the whole fabric of society and attitudes toward culture in America at the time. You had the arrival of LSD in seemingly unending quantities, which much research has shown, and documentation is now available to prove this to be the case, occurred at the hands of those nice people at the CIA.
Yeah.
You know, those nice people in military intelligence that are there to keep us safe.
Oh, yeah.
Just like the government is here to keep us safe from
Yes,
convict,
that's
right?
right. That's right. Which is
So at the same time as you had all the LSD arriving on the scene, you had these changing attitudes to sexuality, to morality, to the idea of the family. You had the idea of Gloria Steinem, the so-called mother of feminism, and Ms. magazine. You had the arrival of the birth control pill, and you had all this incredible rock music that had never been heard before. Well, McGowan's work has shown, and also the work of researchers like Jan Irvin and Joe Atwill, who have got much documentation to prove that a lot of this stuff came out of the CIA. So many of these prominent musicians had families that were up to their necks in military connections. And so many of the groups coming out of Laurel Canyon fit the bill. The classic example which McGowan cited was Jim Morrison of The Doors, who so many people think of as being anti-establishment, anti-war. He was the poster child for that whole generation that kind of opposed those traditional conservative values of their parents' generation. Well, it turns out that Jim Morrison's dad was a very high-ranking Navy admiral by the name of George Stephen Morrison, and he just happened to be the naval officer in command of the fleet of ships in the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which has since been proven to be a false flag, but it was the incident that was used to catapult America into the Vietnam War, with the loss of who knows how many millions of lives that prolonged event caused. So how do you reconcile this? You've got the son, who is supposedly this poster child for the anti-war generation, and then you've got the father going out causing the very war that his son's generation claims to be against. The only way you can reconcile it is by realizing that these artists that are served up to us and that we're entrained and conditioned to think of as heroes and leaders of certain generations are steeped in the very establishment that they claim to be opposing. And this has been the case forever, since the very start of these industries on both sides of the Atlantic. We find it generation after generation, no end of examples. Where you find the presence of the military and military intelligence, it turns out that dark occult ritualistic activity of the type that probably occurs in these woods, you know, at 3 o'clock on any given morning,
nice.
And Satanism are never far from the surface. So, thinking about it, there should be no connection at all between the world of the military and ritualistic, satanic, dark occult activity, right? And yet you find connections going on for days. And where you find connections into the military and Satanism, you also find mind control, trauma-based mind control. And this has been absolutely endemic through the music industry and the entertainment industry generally for decades. You find it in Hollywood, you find it in the television industry, and you find it big time in the music industry. It turns out that so many of our favourite household name artists with which we're all familiar will have been subject to trauma-based mind control and satanic ritual abuse from a very young age. Again, this ties into the family bloodlines that many of these people come out of. Different generations of the same bloodlines are systematically traumatized to cause them to dissociate from reality and for their minds to shatter into many different programmable alters in order to deal with the horror of the trauma that's happening to them. There's much research that's been done into how this plays out into the industry, and there are many symbolic clues to indicate which artists have been subject to this. I go into it in my books in great detail, but the classic example of this would be the interview that Britney Spears gave way back in 2007, at the time when she went a little bit crazy and shaved her head and started attacking cars with umbrellas, if anyone remembers that incident. So at the time she gave an interview, and this is still available on YouTube. She seems to slip into an alternative persona at a certain point in the interview. And this is classic dissociating from reality at a certain trigger phrase which is given, and it causes the subject to slip into one of these different mind control alters. There are so many examples of this. I mean, Kanye West is another good example. He's frequently cited as a bit crazy. He goes off on one of his wild rants, you know. He says all this crazy stuff. But this is classic mind control programming starting to break down at a certain point. And I would say a recent example of this has involved Nicki Minaj, who's come out talking about vaccines and saying that vaccines cause infertility. This has been seized upon naturally by the mainstream press, and they've said, oh, what does Nicki Minaj know? She's not medically qualified. No, there's Bill Gates, but it hasn't stopped him. And so they're trying to put down what she's saying. And to me, this seems to be an example of Nicki Minaj, who has all the symbolic indicators in place to suggest that she's a classic example of trauma-based mind control programming. The program is starting to wear off. It's starting to break down, and part of her own personality is starting to bleed through. I think we've seen this many times with prominent performers from the music industry. I think we saw it with Michael Jackson. I think when he started making his public comments about how the history books have been rewritten, about how Sony is an evil corporation, Tommy Mottola, the one-time CEO of Sony, is the devil, so Michael Jackson said. I think that was an example of his lifelong trauma-based programming starting to wear off, and part of his inherent humanity, his own individual intrinsic personality was starting to come through. And it always ends the same way with these artists that speak out against the industry. I don't know if you've noticed, you know, Michael Jackson spoke out against the Sony Corporation, and well, we know what happened there. Prince, the same way. He had a few things to say about Warner Brothers, his record label. Didn't end too great for him either. George Michael. He's got a bit of a history around Hampstead, hasn't he, from what I gather?
Yeah, the house over the road.
But whatever the case, you know, George Michael had a few things to say about the Sony Corporation, same record label, you will note. He also appeared on BBC Hard Talk many years ago, criticising the Bush and Blair regimes for their warmongering in Iraq and Afghanistan in the wake of 9/11. That was some real talk from George Michael. We all know how that ended.
Yeah.
And it always seems to go the same way for these artists that speak out. There's also the 27 Club. I go into this in my research as well. This is the large number of music artists who just happen to pass away at the age of 27 in some circumstance or other, usually involving some kind of overdose or some kind of, you know, terrible event that nobody could have foreseen. You've got Jimi Hendrix, you've got Jim Morrison, you've got Janis Joplin, you've got Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, There was Robert Johnson, the blues musician back in the day. There was Ron Pigpen McCulloch of the Grateful Dead.
Wow.
More recently, there was Kurt Cobain.
Yeah.
And the most recent was Amy Winehouse, 10 years ago, died at the age of 27. So many, many strange incidences here. Lots more to know once you scratch the surface of the industry in terms of what these artists are used for. So mind control is everywhere. Subliminal programming and thought entrainment is everywhere. And we've seen some very strong examples of this during the COVID scamdemic, where they've really been utilizing their system assets to reinforce the official line of what's going on. And in my upcoming book, Musical Truth Volume 3, I'm going through the individual reactions of many of these prominent household name A-list artists to the COVID scamdemic. I mean, it's quite easy because for the most part, the vast majority have said bugger all about it. They've stayed quiet, they've kept it zipped, and they've not wanted to rock the boat in any way or affect their careers or their pension plans in any way. Those that have spoken out, the vast majority of them have reinforced the official line to the core. It's been, get your vaccine, wear your mask, stay at home, don't cause a fuss. We've seen them all, you know, Sir Paul McCartney, Sir Elton John, Sir Mick Jagger. Is it just me or is there a pattern emerging here? It's all the sirs, isn't it? Have you noticed how many sirs just happen to be exposed as grotesque paedophiles at one point or another? Often after they've died, you know, because there's no living paedophiles. The only paedophiles are dead ones. But it's always the sirs, isn't it? And so they've wheeled out all the sirs, all the system assets, all the lifetime actors to reinforce the official line on this. There have been very few honourable exceptions who have had the balls and the backbone and the individuality of mind to speak out about the tyranny that we've all been facing. So I do call these people out in the book because I think they deserve some honourable exceptions. Van Morrison, he's a sir. Eric Clapton, he's a CBE. Ian Brown. Who else have we had? Buster Rhymes, there's an unexpected one. Buster Rhymes has had a thing or two to say about the tyranny that's going on in the US. And then there's a few other names in the UK, of course. Danny Rampling, is he here yet?
Where is Danny?
I don't know, but Danny has, spoken out.
Yeah.
He's a very rare voice among his peers. Where are all the other DJs?
Aphex
Where's
Twin.
all the other... Aphex Twin, okay.
Yeah.
There's Steve Lawler, Norris the Boss Windross, a few names. Baby D of Let Me Be Your Fantasy fame. But where... My question would be, is where are all the old acid house ravers from back in the day? Where are they? Okay, well, they're all here. They're all here, evidently. They're all in a bloody wood somewhere in Hampstead. But... Here, Chris.
Oh, I got it. Okay. You're a raver.
But, wasn't the spirit of acid house supposed to be similar to the spirit of punk? Wasn't it supposed to be anti-establishment and doing our own thing and sod your rules and regulations and we don't listen to the government? Where are all that original generation?
They're all jabbed.
Yeah, they're all middle-aged and jabbed and standing in line at Aldi.
Mr. C.
And it's a crying shame. Where's all the punk rockers? Where are they? Why are they not speaking out? Why is it only being left? Where's Johnny Rotten? What's he saying?
He spoke out.
Did he? Well, where's Paul Weller? What's Paul Weller saying?
Don't say that. I love Paul Weller.
Where are they?
Morrissey, what's Morrissey?
Morrissey, he's had a couple of things to say, but not a whole lot. So, it's disappointing. It's just being left to a small handful of us, but it's changing, the tide is changing, and we're going to get there. And so, I just want to make the point in closing that the entertainment industry has been weaponized. It was weaponized since day one. It's all been about mind control. It's all been about social engineering. And it's been an ingenious plan because nobody expects to be mind controlled when they think they're just enjoying some favourite music, going to see a band, going to a club night, letting their hair down, doing a bit of dancing, watching a favourite movie, getting in after a hard day at work and putting the telly on and just absorbing some TV program or other. And this is the way it gets done. It's slow drip fed subliminally into the consciousness of the general public. But there's some good news, and that is, as soon as you realise how the game is played and how the tricks are pulled off, the mind control never works on you again. And the analogy that I use is, if you watch an illusionist like Darren Brown, somebody of that ilk, every now and again they will break down how they do their tricks, and they'll show you how they pulled off some seemingly impossible feat. And once they break it down and you see the methods that were used, you'll never be fooled by that trick again. Every time you see that stunt from that point on, you'll say, I know how that was done. I know what's going on here.
Yeah.
And so it is the case with all this mind control that's been done to us through music.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say to me, when you discover that bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Who and the Doors and Pink Floyd, because nobody's immune from this, when you discover that all these bands were controlled and they were pushing agendas, how can you enjoy their music again? Because I feel like just throwing all my old albums out. And I would say that a great song is always a great song, regardless of the circumstances in which it was written. So it may have come from a group like the Beatles, who were absolutely controlled, but they still made some fucking great music.
Yeah. Like Sympathy
And
for the Devil.
right. Well, you know, great music is always going to be great music. And if you can separate the artist from the art, from the product, you can still enjoy this music. You can still enjoy your favourite movies. You just remain mindful of the true nature of those that created them. But it would be a pretty sad and sorry life if we had to throw out all our music, all our movies, all our entertainment, and we were left with nothing. So my message is that we can still enjoy all this stuff, but we just have to arm ourselves with the knowledge of who these people are and what these vehicles have been used for throughout the decades. And when you can do that, you stand a strong chance of still being able to enjoy some semblance of life.
Yeah. Come on, that's it. Come on, wrap it up. Wrap it up.
Covered in some wildlife here. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I do have some copies of my books with me. If anyone's interested, I'm on the hustle here, but I've got them right here. And other than that,
Will you sign them?
I will sign them.
We got the t-shirt.
What an amazing experience. The moon is awesome tonight.
There it is.
Incredible people, an incredible location, and none of this would be happening if I hadn't stepped out and, you know, taken a walk on the wild side all those years ago. I'm very grateful that I did.
Yeah.
So enjoy your evening. We got more speakers, we got more great sounds. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah.